Greetings. My name is Kate Rademacher, and I'm here with Writing for Your Life and Compassionate Christianity. I'm delighted to have one of our longtime friends back to talk about her new book, Caroline Beidler. And very exciting that Caroline has a contributing author this time to her new book, which is titled You Are Not Your Trauma, her mother, Diana Dalles. So both Caroline and Diana are here with us today. We're going to be talking about, again, their new book, which is titled You Are Not Your Trauma, Uproot Unhealthy Patterns, Heal the Family Tree. And it's a really compelling exploration of issues related to trauma in general and also inclusive of intergenerational trauma. So I'm really glad to have you both here and grateful for the words you've written, and congratulations on the forthcoming publication. I think it's coming out soon. Is that right, Caroline?
Yes, yes, September 24th. So depending on when folks are watching or listening, just a little bit here.
Well, why don't we start? If you can just both introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit more about you and how you got into writing in general and where you're calling in from. Caroline, do you want to go first?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Well, my name's Caroline Beidler, and I am tuning in from the foothills of Eastern Tennessee. I'm a Midwest transplant and have lived here for several years and really started my writing journey. Um, I don't know, Mom, what do you say? Kind of as a kid, I remember, I used to I used to copy this children's dictionary that my mom had. I was just so excited to write my own, like make my own dictionary. But I would write stories and just always loved books. I mean, just always loved books. And what ended up happening was just some experiencing some hard things. We talk about it in our new book, and we'll, I'm sure, get into a little bit, but experience some things, ended up really struggling with addiction as a teenager and mental health and untreated trauma symptoms, post-traumatic stress disorder, which I was later diagnosed with. And so I lived a lot of struggle really early on, and through my kind of young adult into my 20s, found recovery in my later 20s, and really felt called to spend my life working to help bring a message of hope to others who are struggling with some of the same things that I had struggled with. And, early on, I did that in a couple of different ways. I went back to get my master's in social work. I am a trained mental health provider, although I'm not licensed, to provide counseling, at this time, but I have a background in mental health, in that training, and really fell in love with kind of the policy side of things, and, grant writing and working at the grassroots kind of advocacy level. Just fell in love with that. And I think a part of that is because through recovery, I started to find my voice. And it's so interesting looking back, because through the years I've been able to use my writing, learn how to use my voice. And now today, it wasn't until like 2020, after having over a decade, near almost, 2 decades in recovery, that I decided to start writing books, being an author. And so I've spent the past couple years, again, feeling called by God to not just write, but learn what it means today to be an author. And I think those two things go together, but there's also another skill set involved in authorship today. And so I've spent a lot of time, energy, and investment into learning both of those sides. And I want to learn how to bring more value to the folks who listen to what I have to say, to the folks who are reading my words. And I want to do that with integrity, as someone who follows Jesus. And so that's where I am today. And I love connecting with you, Kate, and I love, what you all are doing, because I feel like this audience is just a group of like-minded folks, and we're kind of all on this journey together. So that's just a little bit about me. Mom, do you want to say a couple words to introduce yourself?
Yep, I'm Diana Dalles. I grew up, in terms of my writing, I grew up writing as a child. I would write I always thought they were little books. One of them I remember was titled I Have a Voice. So over the years, as I grew up, I wrote these little books. How Caroline, well, I guess I could go back into my history. Um, I realized that I had traumatic events happen to me at some point in my life, and that manifested in my life as a lot of unhealthy relationships, eating disorder, depression, those kinds of things. And when I looked back at it, I could see some of those same things in my parents, grandparents, and realized that I was passing them on to my mother and my children. It was at that point I got really serious and started, working with therapy and looking deeper into my trauma. In terms of my writing, I sent Caroline, I retired probably 8 or 9 years ago, and I sent Caroline a big manila envelope filled with some of my writings because I was going through a lot of my journals. And I just told her that maybe at some point she could use some of those in her writing, maybe, a couple paragraphs, maybe a sentence or two. Little did I know that she was working on a book on intergenerational trauma at that time. And she called me up and she said, Mom, would you like to be included in the book? Um, that had never occurred to me that she would use my writings like that, but I thought that was a great idea. So I said that would be fine. So that's kind of how the book came into being. Um, I got a degree in I was an LPN first, a practical nurse, then decided I wanted to go into social work. So I got my bachelor's and then my master's. And then I've worked in hospitals, I've worked in hospice. And then I finally retired, like I said, in about 7 or 8 years ago. And I live in a small town southwest of Madison. So it's in the kind of in the southwest corner of Wisconsin. Um, so that's kind of a little bit of my background. I just thought she would use a few sentences. I had no idea that I would be involved in this part of writing a book, but it's a real honor for me to be here.
Thank you
That's
so
pretty
much.
much my story.
Thank you. Well, it's really an exciting project. And Caroline, maybe you could just tell us more about the book in general, sort of the structure and what it addresses. And again, perhaps a little bit about how your mom's words are woven in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I kind of want to, Mom, did you know what you were signing up for when I kind
No,
of pitched this idea? And just to clarify
absolutely not.
for folks who are watching or listening, you did agree to it, but I think, like I was saying in my introduction, there's a lot more that goes into being an author than I think a lot of us realize initially. And so, yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. And especially when I mean, the book is about trauma. You are not your trauma. Uproot Unhealthy Patterns and Heal the Family Tree. It's a really complex topic and really hard. I mean, it was, I think, difficult for us for a number of reasons to look at some of those sides of our story. I know for me, I mean, some of the things that I've written in it, I'm still like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that, literally anyone can just buy the book and read that about me, because it's so personal. But I feel like, I can speak for my personal experience that I just feel so called to be that vulnerable and to be that open in my writing. And the feedback that I've gotten, that we've gotten from readers, is like, when we do that, it just opens up this door for other people to kind of walk through that process too. Like, well, if Caroline can say this about herself, maybe it's okay that I can say it too, or maybe that it means that I'm not alone and I don't have to have all this shame about that experience anymore. So anyways, I think and Mom, I'd love to hear your thoughts too. Like, for me, it was more challenging than I had initially anticipated. But I think, the topic is so timely and relevant, and we really tried to write it in a way, not only honoring and respecting the stories for those who have stories that aren't ours to tell. And certainly, we all make mistakes. So, that can happen too in that process, but being mindful of sharing our stories along with evidence-based research. We both weave in, practical tools and tips to help people truly identify, what are some of the areas in my life that I need to heal from, whether you're in addiction recovery, if you have recovery from an unhealthy relationship with food, maybe your thing is, relationships, social media, Netflix, whatever your thing is, what are some of these unhealthy things that are kind of manifesting in your life. And once we address those, and I think this is the really amazing part of the book, is once we can identify some of those unhealthy patterns, we can work to disrupt them. We use the word uproot. There's a lot of tree imagery in the book, which my mom and I, we both are big tree lovers. But, and of course the family tree, but how can we get rid of some of those unhealthy patterns? So we can talk a little more about the book, but Mom, I'd love to hear, if you have any thoughts on that too, and just kind of like the process of this project for you, maybe something that surprised you about this type of writing, and you want to tell a little bit more about how the interludes are kind of woven throughout the book.
Well, first, I want to say that listening to you and reading your first book and watching you tell your stories has given me the courage to go ahead and tell mine. There's things in the book that I've written that I haven't shared with anyone except my family, but it's quite amazing. After I wrote those, I felt an incredible sense of freedom. Like I don't have to pretend to be the kind of person that somebody wants anymore. It's I was just laying it all out there. Here I am. This is what I've been through. Um, and I've held a lot of shame through my life. So by telling my story and releasing all of that, I feel like I'm letting go of a lot of my shame. And this book has been a really a healing process for me. Things have come up for me just reading things that you've written and going through my interludes again. So I've been doing my own healing, going through this whole process. Things that I thought I had dealt with before have come up on a deeper level. So I feel like I'm continuing to have the be on the healing journey. Um, um, that's kind of how things have been for me with writing this book. My interludes are just experiences that I've had throughout my life, things that I said that I haven't shared with a lot of people. And it's kind of shown my journey, my healing journey. Um, and the tone of my interludes are different than the tone of the book. So you can always tell when an interlude starts because it's kind of me just kind of talking. That's kind of what it reads like. Um, and then it's kind of my progress. At the end, I feel like it kind of comes to a climax, at least in my mind. Uh, so that's kind of how writing the book has affected me. You've just been an inspiration to me, Caroline. I feel like I'm kind of hanging on to your coattails in this book. It's like you've led the way, and I'm just kind of, at first, I wasn't too excited, to share my story, but it's like, this feels really good. So um, I'm just hoping that it gives other people a sense of hope that they can share their stories, that they don't have to carry the shame that, throughout their whole life.
Mm.
Um, we're all in this together. And I guess my trauma really isn't the end of my story. I have a lot more to tell. And I finally have my voice, which is really exciting to me. I don't have to be small anymore. So that's where I'm coming from right now.
Well, thanks to you both. It's really wonderful to sort of hear the back and forth and how this came to be. I'd like to just pivot and hear, and maybe Caroline, you can explain this to us a little bit more, but you talk about healing in the book and you outline a series of what you call rhythms, 5 rhythms. And so perhaps you can explain what the 5 rhythms are and how they help structure the book and how they can help guide the reader.
Absolutely. Well, I don't want to give too much away because I want folks to go get your copy of the book. And if you've already gotten it, we have this awesome thing where we're encouraging people to give a copy. So I've heard from a lot of early readers, especially women who are in recovery housing, or other folks, therapists who are finding the book really, really helpful to kind of walk through, because there are so many practical tools, strategies, and kind of this almost guided experience with prompt questions and different things like that. Each of the rhythms kind of ends with a series of practical kind of reflection questions and or action steps that someone could take. So we really wanted this journey, this book to be a journey that readers can go on. The 5 rhythms, and I know we all love our lists and like our 5 point, like do these 4 things. And, especially in publishing today, it's like, great idea, but like, we got to structure this in a list. But I love the idea that, these 5 rhythms aren't like, do these things and you're going to heal from your trauma or your family trauma. That's too much of a promise. And I don't think, that would be true. But what is true is the rhythms. And the reason I like the word rhythm is it's about movement. It's not about like, this is a solution. It's about helping the reader move through kind of this process of things that can move folks towards healing. And so, again, I'm not going to give them all away, but the first one is really centered on this idea of protecting the temple, is kind of how we phrase it. It's all about protecting your body and valuing your body, yourself, and your worth. I think for many of us who experience trauma, and again, I'm speaking from personal experience, but also, I do a lot of research and synthesizing that research. But a lot of us who experience trauma have a very distorted sense of self, where it's like, I remember just zero boundaries. It was like if I was, at a recovery meeting, for example, and there was, a fine young gentleman sitting there who like, no job, no car, lived in his basement. And my mom would attest, some of the guys that I brought home, I mean, just not not treating me well. I would be like, sign me up. This sounds fabulous. This sounds like the guy for me. If someone showed me any sort of attention or love, because really that was what I was seeking. I was seeking love so much. I was seeking, really, I think, seeking a relationship with God the whole time. But, I was just seeking. And so I didn't have a sense of self or boundaries to say, you know what? I don't really like you even. I'm not going to let you in emotionally, intimately. I'm not going to, it was like I had no ability to set those boundaries at all. And so I think starting there, and a lot of the women that I work with and that, I mentor, their experience of trauma, I mean, it makes my mom and I's experience like look like a walk in the park. I mean, such significant trauma, and dealing with this issues of feeling just unworthy and broken and dirty and just, oh, the pain of that. And I know that pain. I've been there, but when we feel that way about ourselves, we don't protect the temple that is us. I mean, the Bible says that we are a temple of the Holy Spirit. I mean, that is so beautiful. And so the first rhythm is really aimed to help people look at that, think about it, and start to maybe shift the mindset a little bit in terms of how we can view ourselves. And we include, practical information too about, how can we set up boundaries? One of the things we talk about is it's assertive communication. And Mom, I don't know about you, but being assertive is something that has taken me a long time to practice. And I still struggle with it sometimes, just being honest, like, we're walking these rhythms right alongside you all. So that's a little bit about how, the book is structured. So it moves through these rhythms, a lot of practical tips and exercises. We actually have a free guided journey experience that you can download. Anyone could just reach out to me, and I'm happy to give those away for free. But again, just kind of all centered on this idea of movement, doing these things, taking action to move towards healing.
Thank you for that. The other thing that I really appreciate about your book, which you mentioned, and you were describing it in the introduction, was that it draws on a lot of evidence-based approaches to trauma recovery. And one of those that I'm particularly familiar with is the adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs. I don't want to put you on the spot, but could you just talk a little bit about the ACEs and sort of how you talk about that in your book?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And we do talk about ACEs. So that stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. So again, a lot of my writing, I really aim to, and I think, Mom, your writing is just so accessible and just, it just brings this emotion, and I think it's so poetic. But just being accessible around some of these concepts that folks may not be familiar with. But adverse childhood experiences just refers to those hard things that we might experience as children. And I think that can happen as very young children. It can happen as teens. And, I experienced a number of adverse childhood experiences. So those could be anything from, divorce, death in the family, neglect, emotional, abuse or different types of struggles, sexual abuse. And when we experience those things, and there's actually like a scale where you can like list, I hate that exercise, by the way, like it's just awful, but it's like I don't want to sit down and list all of them. But when you do that, you realize it's like, wow, I have been through a lot, and I can't, and Kate, you may know, I can't off the top of my head think of, but there's like a set amount. If you've been through 1 to 3, or if you've been to 3 to 5, well, I'm off the charts. And the research is showing that the number of adverse childhood experiences you have, the higher those are as you get older, the more negative health outcomes you have. So that might mean physical health outcomes, greater levels of heart disease or depression, or it could be other things as well. So it's really interesting. And I think that research points to just the impact that trauma can have. And when we have those experiences, it's not hopeless, like it's not the end of the world. It's not that, we're never going to heal, but it shows that this research shows that we need to do something about it. We can't just live having experienced all of these things and then move through adulthood and think that, miraculously things could be different. Now, can God redeem and change and move those things? Yes. And we talk about that in the book too. And I believe we can be active participants with God in our own healing. We talk a lot about in the book that healing is a choice. And I think for a long time, I just felt like life was happening to me. All of these things happen to me. All of this chaos is happening to me. I am just this passive, person in this life that's happening to me. We can participate in our life. We make choices about how things affect us, about how we can heal from what happened to us. And so that is, I'm really hoping, Mom, and I'd love to hear from you too about your hopes for what the reader gets from the book. But my hope is that the reader walks away from reading that and feels like 100% empowered to choose healing and understand that they can work with God to redeem some of those things that happened to them.
Thanks for that. Diana, do you want to jump in there about, what I'd also love to hear from both of you is about sort of the faith element of this. You've referred to it, Caroline, a couple of times, but sort of how um, how has writing this book been part of your faith journey, perhaps, and perhaps also sort of how a sort of message of faith is woven throughout the narrative. So, Diana, do you want to speak to that, or also, Caroline was asking kind of what you hope the reader will get out of the book.
I have the same feelings that Caroline does in terms of what the reader gets out of the book. I'm hoping that people realize that they do have a voice and that they can use that voice to share their stories. Um, I just want to bring up the support that I've gotten from the recovery community is amazing to me because you can tell your story. Everybody has their story, and everybody can feel free to share their story and be accepted and loved no matter what their story is. And I've never experienced that in my life really before. I've always felt I had to hide part of myself in order to be loved and accepted. And I guess when I was small in terms of God, I felt that God totally abandoned me. I felt absolutely totally alone in my struggles. Um, and then as I grew up, it's taken me quite a while to actually realize that there was a God out there, that there's a higher force out there that could help me. But once I came to that realization, it's like I will never feel alone again. And that is a total comfort to me. It gives me strength, it gives me hope. So that's kind of been my spiritual journey. I'm still on my spiritual journey, but um, I feel much more grounded in that. And I don't feel like I'm just a bystander in my own life watching what's going on. I feel like I can be totally present and I don't have to be fearful of my life and fearful of people around me, that I can totally, like I said, be grounded in my life.
That's beautiful. I love that so much, Mom. I think that's really amazing. And you say that, you're inspired by me. I'm so inspired by you in your journey, and I think that just not only what you've been through, but just what you've learned from that, and that you keep showing up and, like you said, keep choosing to heal, and not be a bystander. I love that.
Thank you so much to both of you. Caroline, maybe we can shift gears a little bit. And, you mentioned a couple times that you've worked to gain skills and understanding and aptitude in the arena of being an author. And you sort of contrasted that with being a writer and said that they're similar, but, also distinct skill sets. So can you say a little bit more about that? In particular, this is your second book, and I'm just curious if there are any lessons learned you have about the publication process, and or the promotion process. I know You Are Not Your Trauma is being published by Lake Drive Books. Is that right? Who's a long time, um, David Morris is a longtime friend of Writing for Your Life, and I know that's a great publisher. So maybe you can just tell us a little bit about any lessons learned you've had along the way the second time around. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, I love talking about this so much. And my mom knows this too, because I've been rattling off information and strategies that I've learned for the past couple years. We've had a lot of fun conversations, at least on my end. I don't know, Mom, maybe.
I agree. I agree. Yep.
Oh, but so I want to dive into that. I do want to just talk quickly about the faith piece, because I think sometimes if people may pick up my books, they might be a little bit surprised because I am a faith-based author. But I also want my books to speak to the person out there who's seeking, who might not be quite sure. And so I think a lot of times, a lot of the quote unquote Christian books on the market speak specifically to a Christian audience, which is great. It's awesome. I love that. And we also need books that can speak to folks who maybe aren't quite there yet. I don't hide the fact that I'm a Christian. We include information in the book that is, definitely bringing, scripture and different pieces, and it's woven throughout. But in the beginning of this one, I kind of even have this disclaimer because a lot of my audience don't identify as being Christian, and a lot of folks um, that I'm writing, that this book is for, have experienced religious trauma, and I even got a couple messages last week by folks who were reading and said, I made it through the end. I didn't skip the last rhythm, which may or may not have a little bit more to do with the faith piece of things. I didn't skip the last rhythm. I don't identify as believing in God yet, but I didn't skip that, and I'm reading that and I'm listening. And that was just so, I'm like getting goosebumps. That was so impactful and moving to me. And so I really try to write to the person who's seeking. So the writing journey and author journey, and like, it's funny. I was wondering the other day, like if I would have known like how much work this would be 4 years ago when I decided to be an author, I felt God calling me to be an author, not just a writer anymore. Would I do it? Yes, I guess, yeah, I definitely would do it. But I think understanding that those things are two different things is really important. And I think the best thing that I have done for myself as an author is surround myself with people who know more than me about being an author today, and or with community. Mom, you mentioned just feeling so supported and loved by the recovery community. Through recovery, I have learned how important living in community is. I lived a lot of my life alone, isolated, feeling like I had to do it by myself. I was the only one, I couldn't rely on anyone. People couldn't be trusted. Being a part of recovery has shifted that for me in such a way that other things in my life, like writing, that's one of the reasons I love, Kate, what you do with this group, is because we need community. we need to do this together. And so, I've been a part of a group called the Grit and Grace Project, which is a group of Christian, women authors. We actually have a book series coming out called Small Living, or excuse me, Smart Living, and not Small Living, Big Living, Smart Living and Small Bites. And so anyway, stay tuned for a little bit more on that coming up. But so a group of women writers, we hold, there's accountability, there's prayer, we bring ideas, and it's been a place where I can really practice and learn more about writing too. I want to be able to bring more value to my readers. Writing isn't just about me. It's not a therapeutic thing. I'm not just telling my story. There's a purpose for it, and it's to help the reader. It's to move the reader. So definitely surrounding myself with people. I've done things like author coaching. So there's another great resource called Yates and Yates Author Coaching, and I would plug this to anyone. Oh my goodness. But Yates and Yates actually has been around for decades. It's a literary agency, one of the top Christian literary agencies, but they've started author coaching several years ago and have everything from like a course on how to put together a book proposal, to how to hone in on a great book idea. Now, there's a little bit of a financial investment in some of these things, but 100% worth it. I mean, I actually just landed, and my mom, you were like, "What are you doing? You're crazy." I just landed another book deal for my third book with a traditional publisher this time, and I think a huge part of that was what I learned from Yates and Yates Author Coaching. So another amazing resource. So learning more about what resources are out there for writers, and certainly marketing strategy, platform development, which Kate, I believe you and I had a really fun chat about platform development for beginners. So we may want to link to that, which was a fun chat to have. But learning about some of these concepts, a target audience, a felt need, we need to educate ourselves on how we write books to serve the reader. And I think if we want to be authors today and get our books out there to folks, we need to learn all of the pieces. But we don't have to do that by ourselves. We can do that in community, which is pretty amazing.
Thanks so much. And I think that that's a really, really good point you made in your remarks about sort of that publishing a book isn't just a therapeutic project, and some of the benefits, as we as writers may have benefits to our own emotional and spiritual lives, but that we're really, writing for the reader. And I think that's been one of the major things I've learned in the author journey, is how much publishers want you to have that mindset, that you're writing for the reader, not just for yourself. And I think that's a really important evolution and distinction.
Mhm.
Diana, can we switch back to you? And could you just tell us a little bit more about the interludes in the book, and how those are structured? Having read it, my understanding is these are excerpts from your journal. So can you just give a little bit more of like what time period these journals were from, and sort of how the interludes are structured?
Okay, the interludes. The first interlude is when I was about 13 years old. Just talks about some medical issues, mental health issues, and what happened to me as a result of those issues. Um, it progresses. There's one where I talk about my rage. There was a point in my life where um, I was just really, really angry about how trauma had affected me and how I felt it had shaped my life. So I kind of go through some of the things that I'm angry about, that I'm rageful about. Um, toward the end, it comes to more of a beautiful part where I can look upon the beauty of the earth and see how the earth has shaped my thinking, and realize that there is um, a higher power, or whoever you would call it, out there with the beauty of the earth. And then the last one, pretty much, it's kind of a high point to me. I feel exhilarated. I feel free. Um, it has to do with dancing, and letting go of my trauma. Um, so the interludes are just Caroline took my writings and just put them in where she felt that they fit in the book. Um, so I didn't necessarily say put this in, put that in, but she kind of picked out what she felt fit. Um, and it just feels like it all sort of wove together in a really comprehensive way.
You for that. Well, maybe this is sort of as we start to wrap up, I'd love to just talk for a minute about the concept of intergenerational trauma. And Caroline, maybe you can start, that it seems like that's a big theme of the book, not just healing um, our own traumas, but the trauma throughout our family tree. And I know that's something that is getting increasing attention and conversation in general. So could you just say a little bit more about intergenerational trauma and how you sort of as a unique approach with bringing your mom into the narrative addresses that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I feel like, with the story, when my mom sent me this manila envelope of, I mean, it was I don't know, mom, like 120 pages or, something. And at one point you had wanted to try to put it together as its own, project, as its own book. And I received these writings and I had been writing, I wasn't writing at that time about specifically intergenerational trauma, but I was writing about some stories and the same thing started coming up. And so when my mom sent me this, I just could see my story and her story. And we've known for a long time. It's kind of interesting how our lives have mirrored each other a little bit, but we've experienced some of the same things, And Mom, you mentioned having struggles with relationships and relationship with food, and I also had those same struggles. And so seeing how things are reflected when I became a mother, I remember, and I start the book with this story of when I found out that I was pregnant, because it was this very powerful moment in my life where I realized that I could be part of a new story and that my kids did not have to repeat some of the same. And, and I talk in the book about my mom, and mom, this is our project together, but certainly a lot of what I experienced in my life had to do with other family members that are not in the book. So, but all of the pieces together, looking at that, I didn't want some of those same patterns from whatever family member, but or generations before to impact my kids. I wanted to have them live in a more free way and kind of start breaking that cycle and that chain, and that some of these unhealthy patterns could stop with me. It could stop with my generation. And so looking at mom's book, it all kind of came together. And so I started doing research on intergenerational trauma. And Kate, like you said, it's an up and coming concept. Some of the research isn't as up and coming. It had been done a couple decades prior, but experiences, for example, of Holocaust survivors and descendants of Holocaust survivors, generations down the line, having, I mean, hundreds of times greater levels of anxiety and depression, and some of these situations. Other folks that we talk about in the book, for example, Indigenous communities, Black communities, other communities that have experienced unspeakable tragedy and trauma, and seeing how that has changed generations later, and that impact of what that does to not only like some of the things that we are doing, whether it's or some of the things that we experience, or like, for example, depression, but also there's other research, more recent, around something called epigenetics, which we talk about a little bit in the book, which is that our literal like DNA at the cellular level, our bodies are changing when we experience trauma, and also because of what our ancestors have experienced. So it's passed down genetically, which is just like, it's kind of above my pay grade to talk about it in detail. Again, I talk about it hopefully in an accessible way for readers, is just kind of skimming the surface. But it's so interesting to see how it all fits together. So when we can understand that maybe some of the things that we're living today, whether it's boundary issues, relationship challenges, again, issues with food, whatever the thing is, it might be related to some of those things we experienced in childhood, like adverse childhood experiences, and It may be something related to what our parents have experienced, their parents have experienced, generations before that we've never met and have no idea about, right? So it's really, really interesting. And I think, as I don't know, as society, as we go on, it's like more is revealed. We have this saying in recovery that more shall be revealed. God reveals more to us. So we're learning about these things, I believe, because we are at a place where we can start addressing them. We can start moving towards healing and learning how we can support each other through that process.
Well, thank you so much for that. Just in terms of wrapping up, I'd love to hear where can we find out more about your work and find the book. I know it's coming out soon. And if there's anything else you want to share about the writing process of the book, and just as a couple of closing remarks.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I can start, Mom, and then if you want to close, that would be awesome. So I'm so excited. In like a couple weeks, I'm coming to Wisconsin. My mom and we're hitting the road. We've got a week of events. It's going to be super fun. I'm so excited. So we're going to be spending some time up near Madison, Wisconsin. For that, I have a whole book tour. So I'm going to Nashville tomorrow. It's going to be a really busy couple weeks, but it's super exciting. So you can find me on my website, which is CarolineBeidler.com. Do not call me Beidler. I will still love you, but it is Beidler. And so it's Caroline Beidler, Beidler.com. And the book will be available by the end of the month anywhere you buy books. So You Are Not Your Trauma, Uproot Unhealthy Patterns, and Heal the Family Tree. Mom, do you have any closing thoughts or?
I just want to say how important it is to realize that your voice can make a difference, your story can make a difference, that you don't have to live your life hidden or pretending to be somebody that you're not, that you are lovable, that you are not alone. Um, there's just so many things that I hope people get from this book. Um, that's pretty much my last words.
Well, thank you both
And
so much again. Okay.
I'm honored to be here on this program with you. So thank you for inviting us.
Really enjoyed and appreciated the conversation. So thanks to you both. Again, the title of the book is You Are Not Your Trauma, Uproot Unhealthy Patterns, Heal the Family Tree. And as Caroline mentioned, you can find it soon in wherever books are sold. So thank you both so much, and blessings as you spread the word and talk to people about the book. And, trauma recovery healing is such a critical issue for each of us as individuals and also as communities and nations and as the world. So I'm grateful for the work you're doing.
Well, thank you so much. And you as well, Kate.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks again. Blessings on the launch.
Thanks.